Thanks for tuning in. I'm Scott Walter.
And I'm Michael Watson.
In this episode, traditional liberals stagger under a challenge from the upstart, extreme left-wing Democratic Socialists of America. This is the InfluenceWatch podcast. The political world was shaken last month when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a 28-year-old left-wing bartender, won the Democratic primary to represent a congressional district in New York City. She defeated the fourth-ranking House Democrat, Representative Joe Crowley. Ocasio-Cortez is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, a far-left pressure group explicitly advocating to, quote, abolish profit, abolish prisons, abolish cash bail, and abolish borders, to quote the DSA's New York City affiliate's Twitter account. Far-left factions in the Democratic Party and professional left are enthusiastic about Ocasio-Cortez's success, believing that it portends a socialist revolution in Democratic leadership and American politics. But just how applicable is the success of one candidate in one of the most left-wing congressional districts to the nation at large, a nation where Donald Trump is president of the United States? Okay, Mike, let's start by saying that, of course, we are simply professional observers on this very interesting spectacle.
This is a, by rules, we are not permitted to formally intervene in elections and to encourage or discourage voting one way or the other. But we are allowed to present our opinion.
That's right. So we are just looking at this fascinating spectacle among many groups that we have always tracked, like Democratic Socialists of America. Look it up on InfluenceWatch.org. And that's why we're dealing with this today. So tell us a little bit about New York District 14.
So New York 14 is it's one of those kind of gerrymandered districts in New York City. It includes a chunk of the Bronx and I think a chunk of Queens, and it is represented and will be represented until January of 2018 by a gentleman by the name of Joe Crowley, who is chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, which is the number 4 ranking Democrat in the Democratic Party leadership.
For the House of Representatives.
For the House of Representatives. Now, he was challenged by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a young left-wing woman. And despite the fact that Ocasio-Cortez only was able to raise and spend about a tenth of the money that Crowley did, she was able to defeat him for the Democratic nomination. And the Democratic nomination in a district like New York 14 is effectively the general election. The Cook Political Report, which is the sort of Bible of psephology for determining the left-wingness or right-wingness of congressional districts, gives it a partisan voting index, which is a measure of how democratic a district is, of Democratic plus 29, I believe. And that makes it tied with a number of other constituencies to be the 24th most liberal, 24th most democratic. So winning the Democratic primary is tantamount to securing the
election,
securing the ultimate general election.
Yep. Now the left is extremely excited, not just because they knocked off the number 4 member of the party in the House, but also because they think this portends shifting alliances and new way to make majorities.
a new way to make majorities and a new way to make existing Democratic majorities further left wing. Ocasio-Cortez, I believe was either born in Puerto Rico or her parents were born in Puerto Rico. So even though Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens and have been for 100 years. There's a sort of an alignment with that sort of immigrant vote, and there's a large number of immigrants and other ethnic voters in those precincts who make up the backbone of the Democratic Party in that district. And the liberals' thought is that this portends a sort of nationwide alliance between the sort of traditional urban working classes and the new immigrant populations that are going to really push the Democratic Party to the left. There are a couple problems with that. The people who look into this sort of thing have looked at which precincts Crowley won and which precincts Ocasio-Cortez won. And what actually seems to have happened is that young, white, more upscale, in many cases, this is important in Democratic primaries, more female precincts went strongly for Ocasio-Cortez, while the traditional working class and traditional immigrant precincts did not go as strongly for Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, I want to hear that one more time. So supposedly because this is such a classic left-wing thing, whether we're talking politics or just influence groups, supposedly poor people, black people, Hispanic people, marginalized people of all kinds, those are the real avant-garde of the left. But it looks like, at least in this case, that's not true.
Well, it kind of isn't, period. In this case, it pretty clearly wasn't. It was the gentrifier precincts.
Yeah, young yuppies.
Young yuppie Chardonnay socialists went strongly for Ocasio-Cortez. The psephologists and election analysts will often say that the strongest establishment bloc in the Democratic Party is African American voters. It is not that the ethnic minority working class that is necessarily pushing the furthest to the left, the most radical, the most extreme. They are in many cases the backbone of the traditional liberalism of somebody like a Joe Crowley or a Charles Schumer or a Bill Thompson, who was a candidate for mayor of New York City in 2013 but lost.
And in fact, take another on the other side of the country, take another case. Sometimes black voters and Hispanic voters can be significant in social conservative victories. Proposition 8, the controversial measure in California.
Yeah, the attempt to reverse same-sex marriage in California.
After the courts had imposed it. Yes, the minority vote was actually very important to that.
Yeah, it was because there is that there is far more religiosity among ethnic minorities who vote for Democrats than among Anglos who vote for Democrats.
Yes. So that's several very popular left-wing myths slightly bumped away there. Well, let's now take a look at the Democratic Socialists of America that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was a very proud member of. Where did they come from?
So the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, traces its own lineage back to the Socialist Party of America of the early 20th century. Famously ran Eugene Debs, a newspaperman and labor organizer, for president several times. Debs was sent to prison by Woodrow Wilson, the great progressive hero, for opposing the draft in World War I. I think it ultimately fell to Herbert Hoover to give him clemency, or not Herbert Hoover, Warren Harding. It fell to Warren Harding in the return to normalcy to grant him clemency. So
the Socialist Party of America was also the party for Norman Thomas, who was for many years a left-wing fringe candidate for the presidency.
The Socialist Party ultimately folds because it doesn't gain suitable traction. Left-wing political strategists decide that it's better to be a pressure group within a major party than to be a minor party all to yourself. And so they formed the Democratic Socialists of America to be a pressure group fundamentally within the Democratic camp. It is now registered as a 501c4 social advocacy group, which allows it to advocate in elections as long as it's not in direct connection with the campaign. As of last year, the group now claims 25,000 dues-paying members. They claim to have had a surge of membership after the election of President Trump as Democrats, liberals, and leftists have been motivated to engage in the political process in ways that they haven't before.
That's right. So they should send a nice thank you note to Mr. Trump for boosting their budget. Well, just how far to the left are the Democratic Socialists of America?
I will leave it to the liberal-leaning website Vox.com to explain that. So according to a write-up they did on DSA, many DSA members would go further than any of these New Deal Democrats. That's their word for normal liberal Democrats. One useful distinction is that while progressive Democrats and DSA both believe in the welfare state programs as a way to improve capitalism, DSA sees them as just one step toward completely severing the link between human needs and market scarcity. As if it is the market that creates the scarcity rather than the market attempting to allocate scarcity caused by the fact that humans cannot have whatever they want whenever they want it.
Yes, as Plato, all the way back to Plato 2,500 years ago, human wants are infinite. Which suggests there may always be issues of scarcity.
And you would think that our friends on the left who, hang out with environmentalists who say that, we've used up all the Earth's resources, you think they would know that. But, when it comes to when it comes to a pointless critique, a false critique of the market, they always choose to make it.
That's right. So I think you have a bit more from the Vox description of Democratic Socialists of America, which again, this is a friendly source.
Yes, this is a friendly source, sympathetic to progressivism and leftism. So they quote a DSA member who edits a socialist magazine. There's a continuum between Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the leaders of the Democratic Party in the Senate and the House, respectively, and liberal Democrats, who don't want to go further than the expansion of the welfare state, and the center of DSA, who would want everything in a Bernie Sanders program. Sanders, of course, ran for president in 2016 on a self-described socialist platform, as a starting point, and then think about what to do next. So we're talking about left of Bernie Sanders, who until January of 2018, one presumes, is the only self-described socialist in the U.S. Congress, to my knowledge.
Yes, so that is a pretty radical place to be, but at least I give the Democratic Socialists of America credit for being honest about and blunt even about just how far they want to go. As we quoted earlier, rattling off, they're going to abolish profit.
They're going to abolish profit at the same time they abolish prisons, which, a number of socialist countries, let's say the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, they all got very far along in abolishing profit, but they tended to open more prisons than close prisons.
Yes, when you abolish the market, it often becomes necessary to
lock lots of capitalists in prison.
Now, I know immediately somebody is going to jump up and object. Wait. You're viciously slurring the Democratic Socialists of America by implying that there's some connection.
These are democratic socialists and
so
those
therefore,
are undemocratic. No. The DSA has been known to hang out with people who have very close ties to the old Warsaw Pact, the old Soviet bloc. The Washington, D.C., our local chapter of the DSA, has worked with a gentleman by the name of Kurt Stand, who did a substantial prison term for spying for East Germany.
Yes, for the secret police of East Germany, the secret police, notorious Stasi.
Yeah,
to give the Germans credit for their great capacities, the East German secret police was one of the absolute most effective, brutally repressive
communist bloc secret polices
of all time.
And Stand, his conviction for spying for East Germany was not enough to not only for them to stop
the Democratic Socialists.
Not only to stop the DSA from not having anything to do with him anymore. They were publishing his writings from prison.
Yes.
While he was
in prison for helping the secret police. They were publishing him now, and more recently, he has officially rejoined our local Democratic Socialists of America. And as far as can find anywhere, there's no indication that he regrets in any way his work with the socialists of East Germany, or that his colleagues have any concerns.
I have not seen anything to suggest that he regrets his association with the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. You may know them better as the Communist Party of East Germany.
Yes. And we should put in addition to plugging our InfluenceWatch.org for more on the Democratic Socialists of America, we should also say that if you go to the YouTube channel for Capital Research Center, you will find our most popular video of all time is a simple couple of minutes or so that explains why communism will always become violent. This apparently is a controversial view among many young people, and entire videos were produced to try to rebut the claims there. But it's well worth considering that there may be a reason that Germany's socialism resulted in secret police.
There's a reason that, usually capitalists don't have to say, we are democratic capitalists. Socialists have to be very clear that they're the democratic socialists and not the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, even when they're hanging out with former operatives for the Socialist Unity Party of Germany.
Yes. Well, now let's talk a bit about the activist strategy for Democratic Socialists of America and what they're hoping to accomplish here.
So, according to that Vox report, DSA has three main sort of activist thrusts. Local pressure campaigns on issue items, things like minimum wage increases, trade union laws.
Yeah, I will jump in and say that I'm aware, for instance, in the city of Austin, Texas, a famous left-wing redoubt like the district that Ocasio-Cortez won, a city councilman who's a DSA member is pushing not just higher minimum wage, but very extensive sick leave and also scheduling laws where if you are a poor McDonald's manager, you have to give all your employees 2 months ahead of time schedules or pay them time and a half
which is further than even San Francisco went when they did this sort of thing.
Yes. So as you were saying, DSA activists are pulling this sort of thing around the country.
And then there's advocating for DSA candidates, people like Ocasio-Cortez. And then there is general support for union organizing and for left-wing organizing. Vox specifically mentioned the campaign by the UAW to unionize a Nissan plant in Mississippi. That, of course, failed 2-1.
Yes. Now, that sort of standardish political campaigning is not the only thing that DSA is engaged in. However, sometimes it often goes into what the left so gently and sweetly refers to as direct action. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there's been some controversy recently about where the line is between sort of violent, improper activism and legitimately protesting the government policy. DSA tries to walk on that line, just to the legal side of that line. They're the DC chapter. When Kirstjen Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, which is of course responsible for immigration enforcement, was eating at a restaurant, they surrounded her and chanted slogans, and then she had to leave. And that was, again, an official act of the activist group.
So it remains to be seen exactly where the limit of activism for DSA will turn out to be. We've been talking about Ocasio-Cortez, the 28-year-old now Democratic candidate for Congress, but she is not the only young Democrat to be very frank about her embrace of socialism, is she?
No, not at all. They're of Democrats between 18 and 34, and that is a large number of that is not quite all 18 to 34, but a full 68%, according to one poll, of women that age are currently expressing a Democratic voting intention. So 61% of Democrats, the larger block of 18 to 34s, have a positive view of socialism. That doesn't necessarily mean they are socialists, but they have, unlike in, say, your time when the Red Men, all those countries that I mentioned earlier with socialist in their names, even somebody on the Democratic side like a Charlie Wilson or a Scoop Jackson recognized they're the bad guys. Even trade unionists like Lane Kirkland, who was president of the AFL-CIO in the late 20th century, recognized that this was not where to go. That memory, that historical memory, isn't present in people my age. It's fitting. Ocasio-Cortez was born only a month before the wall fell.
Yeah, the Berlin Wall.
The Berliner Mauer, the Berlin Wall, getting back to East Germany.
Yes. Which was my birthday, actually. It was quite a nice birthday present to receive in 1989.
So, no living memory of socialist totalitarianism. And they do have a memory, people my age do have a memory either of being in college or just out of high school looking for work, or just out of university when it seemed like capitalism had gone off the rails in the 2008 financial crisis. Now, obviously, we can say that government policy contributed to the 2008 financial crisis, and not just in the way that the left will concede that government policy contributed to the 2008 financial crisis by being too deregulatory. Policies like the Community Reinvestment Act, which encouraged and essentially forced banks to make bad credit decisions. The close connection between government and government regulators and banks who could then use their influence to pervert the regulation that existed. But, to the general public, that looks like it was unfettered capitalism that caused all these problems.
No, I remember all that well, and even though, as you say, it really started, the housing crisis actually got started in a serious way under the Democratic president, Bill Clinton, which was the beginning of the policies forcing bad credit decisions. And they were done, of course, in the name of ethnic equality, that there were racial and ethnic disparities.
There was that, and then, I believed in it when George W. Bush proposed it, the ownership society, that we were going to make it easier for people to own homes. We were going to make it easier for people to own, to own cars, to own especially homes. And again, unfortunately, that led to a lot of bad risks being taken. And then what the banks did was they tried to shuffle off their bad risks that they knew were bad risks on people who didn't know any better. And that contributed substantially to the problem.
Yes, lots and lots of blame to go around for the crisis, and especially government and both parties in connection with the government. Well, so to get back where we were a second ago, though, so you have lots and lots of young people who think that socialism is swell, don't begin to have any fear of what socialism in practice has typically led to. And this is causing turmoil for the Democratic Party as a whole. I was shocked to learn that the Democratic National Committee chairman, the ostensible leader of the party, especially when there's no presidential nominee out there, Tom Perez, who was labor secretary in the Obama administration, he called Ocasio-Cortez the future of our party.
Yeah, he did that. He did that on a liberal talk radio show. You look at some of these numbers and you see that there is this rising, at least among Democrats and progressives, sympathy for socialism. There is this absence of knowledge of the consequences of socialism in practice. And I mean, I'll throw another one out there. So obviously when a capitalist supporter says, hey, wait a minute, either they go back to the Warsaw Pact like I did, or they talk about a place like Venezuela, Nicaragua, where current socialist economies are, again, in the case of Venezuela, full-blown collapse. In the case of Nicaragua, there have been repressions by the government of Daniel Ortega against demonstrators who are protesting against various things going on with the government there. And they'll say, wait, hold on, wait a minute. But, we don't want Venezuela. We don't want Nicaragua. We want, Sweden. We want Finland. We want Denmark. So Denmark was in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. And they were in the New York Times because they had a very, I will say fairly ruthless assimilationist immigration policy for obviously there's been migration into Europe, especially in the last few years, but even before then, and liberal progressive socialists on the internet were horrified that their great socialist hope, the Nordic countries, were instituting these very strict. I mean, if you tried them in the United States, they would almost assuredly be struck down as unconstitutional infringements on compelled speech, unconstitutional infringements on freedom of movement. And Denmark's not alone. Sweden is having an election this year, and the nationalist, populist Sweden Democrats are likely to do better than they have in a long time.
I would throw out, too, in the case of Sweden, that Sweden actually has an enormously good and broad school choice laws, what in America would be called vouchers, effectively, or roughly speaking. I would love, and the teachers' unions would be horrified by the kinds of school choice legal possibilities.
Absolutely,
that Sweden has.
and if you want to, if you really want to get into the Nordics as a model, if you look at like the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom, they all do pretty well, and the reason is because they're not actually socialist in terms of government ownership of the means of production. They are large welfare states with with really high taxes that are appended to very open, very classically liberal economies. So again, when a left-winger says, I want to be more like Denmark, I want to be more like Finland, I want to be more like Sweden, what he really means is I want to be more like France 30 years ago. France before Emmanuel Macron. And that I don't think is what I don't think people very, very seriously understand that.
Well, I will have to comment that the teachers' unions and the other left of center folks who control America's schooling, which continues to slide against in performance against all of the countries we've mentioned and many, many more around the world, have helped to inculcate, if you can inculcate, ignorance in younger people. And of course, to be fair to the teachers' unions, the K-12, the travesty of K-12 education and its failure to teach history and basic economics and the rest pales in comparison to the failures at the higher ed level, I dare say, for most folks.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point with teachers' unions, because of course the so-called neoliberals, the not socialists in the Democratic Party, one wonders that they probably won't go quietly if they, as they see this rising socialist revolution. Mike Bloomberg, who, while no fan of gun owners and no fan of social conservatives, was also no fan of the teachers' unions and no fan of those who would wish to abolish prisons. As, of course, the Bloomberg administration continued most of the Giuliani's mayoralty anti-crime policies.
Yes. We should say that Bloomberg is the billionaire behind Bloomberg News, and for 3 terms, the New York City mayor.
For 3 terms as mayor of New York City, and now is a big money, is a big political donor. He has vowed to give $80 million to help Democrats get elected to the House.
In this term.
In this election. But again, how well is he, who again governed New York City as a tough on crime, union busting, but still a social liberal who hates guns, moderate? How is he going to live in a coalition with this faction that wants to abolish profit? of which Mr. Bloomberg has made quite a bit.
Yes, in the billions. Well, and in fact, of course, the far left side within the Democratic Party, before Ocasio-Cortez's big upset of Crowley, they didn't have any trophies. They hadn't
been doing well. Our Revolution, which is a group that basically is the Bernie Sanders campaign in continuation. Now, since President Obama, after he was elected the second time, started Organizing for America, basically as a standalone side group to advocate for himself and his policies. You see these sort of campaigns in continuation after the campaign is over. Our Revolution is that for the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's an advocacy group that's run by all of Bernie's people that advocates for Bernie's vision of social democracy, of socialism. They hadn't had a win until Ocasio-Cortez came along. Now, Ocasio-Cortez's big win. You bump off the number 4 Democrat in the party. That's a big deal, but there isn't a breadth of victories. They had a couple. They had one other go along with Ocasio-Cortez for the Democratic nomination for governor of Maryland, but other than that, it has not been a widespread surge of socialist revolution.
Sure, and of course, I suppose we should bring up the last Democratic president, Barack Obama. He had some ties before the presidency with Democratic Socialists of America, but not many DSAers would brag about his achieving their policy goals while in the White House.
Right. When he was running for state legislature in Illinois way back, he was giving speeches at DSA forums. But when he actually came to govern, obviously he was a liberal. Obviously he was a progressive. Obviously he would probably qualify as the second most left-wing, first or second most, depends on whether you count LBJ, left-wing president, certainly on the domestic side, since World War II. But to the DSA, I mean, if you look at Obamacare, for all of what it is, for the fact that it is a massive package of government regulations and of individual mandates, it is not the government seizing control of the healthcare system and nationalizing it and making all doctors state employees, something like the National Health Service in Great Britain. And indeed, it was so light touch on the medical industry that it was supported by the American Medical Association, the progressive-leaning doctors lobby. So if you're a abolish profit socialist, Barack Obama wasn't that. Barack Obama was not your hero who will bring you, like Clement Attlee, the British Prime Minister who inaugurated the National Health Service, into the new era of Fabian state control. Instead, he's just another Bloomberg. He's just another neoliberal.
Well, now, for those of us who, of course, would be happy to see a less unconstitutional and obese national government, that is comforting. But I know that in the big picture of these things, the Ocasio-Cortezes, who are young, may be able to fire back. And I know you have your worries on this score, and I'll let you have the last word on that.
I actually brought up most of them in our conversation. Ocasio-Cortez was born a month before the wall fell. I was born a couple months before the wall fell. I have no living memory of the Soviet Union. People in my generation have no living memory of the international struggle against state socialism, which we called communism. But we do have a vivid memory of when capitalism seemed to get it wrong. And until and unless conservatives and libertarians and free market supporters have answers for the real kitchen table concerns of young people, things like student loan debt, things like household formation, housing prices. My sister moved out to California and has had to couch surf for weeks because rents are obscene. Until conservatives and free market people, whether they're conservatives, whether they're neoliberals, whether they're libertarians, have answers to those concerns that, socialism is a very easy sale. I will give you free stuff and other people will pay for it. Now, you and I both know that there are a million asterisks after that. The fine print is as long as, is far longer than that slogan. But we live in an age of sound bites. All you get is a quick shot. And until free marketers really have answers to some of those questions, that easy fix is going to be very tempting.
On that sobering note, I'll close out the show for this week. If you are listening to us on iTunes or Stitcher, you should know that we broadcast a live video version of this podcast at 10 a.m. on Thursdays on Facebook Live and YouTube. You can find our pages by searching Capital Research Center. And if you're watching the video version, we encourage you to subscribe to the audio on your preferred podcast platform. We'll see you next week.